Dear friends, welcome to another episode of the Spokemaster. In this video, we will discuss the new sanctions imposed by the United States against Russia's energy sector, measures that block billions of dollars monthly which were helping Putin finance his invasion of Ukraine. To understand these new American sanctions, it's essential to revisit the context. The war in Ukraine, which started in February 2022, triggered one of the largest geopolitical crises since World War II. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia was met with an international response that included, besides military and financial support to Kyiv, a series of heavy sanctions aimed at weakening Russia's war machine. Energy, specifically oil and natural gas, has always been the pillar of the Russian economy, accounting for nearly 50% of Russia's annual GDP before the war began. The initial sanctions sought to limit Moscow's ability to profit from its energy production without causing chaos in global markets. For example, in 2022, the United States and its allies imposed a price cap on Russian oil, allowing the resource to continue flowing into the international market, but at significantly reduced values. This approach aimed to minimize the impact on global consumers while trying to reduce the inflow of Russian profits. Now, in 2025, the Biden administration has taken an additional step by announcing a new round of sanctions described by analysts as the final blow to the Russian energy sector in the final days of Joe Biden's administration. These sanctions innovate by including measures involving the blocking of Russian vessels, with a total of 183 ships being sanctioned, including tankers operated by Russian companies and part of the so-called Ghost Fleet, a massive fleet of old end-of-life tankers sailing with their identifiers turned off, used to transport oil to non-Western countries like China and India, thus circumventing the sanctions. This new round of sanctions also directly affects smaller companies like Gazprom subsidiaries, the giant and powerful Russian state-owned gas company. These subsidiaries play crucial roles in the Russian energy sector, although they do not have the reach of giants like Rosneft. Despite these measures, Rosneft and other major energy market intermediaries were spared, reflecting a calculated approach that seeks to avoid total disruption in global oil markets. After all, a sharp increase in prices could harm economies worldwide, including the American one. According to industry analysts, dozens of Russian tankers were detained at ports and terminals where they were located, with more than 100 others en route being forced to return to Russian waters to avoid seizure. The potential impact of these sanctions is profound, with analysts estimating that Russian revenues could drop by billions of dollars each month, directly compromising the financing of military operations in Ukraine. But what will be the direct impacts of these new sanctions on Russia? The Russian economy is already facing a combination of challenges. Since the start of the conflict, the country has been dealing with rising inflation, a sharp devaluation of the ruble, and trade restrictions increasing the prices of essential goods. Moreover, the exodus of talent and workforce due to mandatory military mobilization and the emigration of skilled workers have significantly reduced the available labor force, which is reflected in a sharp decline in living standards in the more peripheral and less industrialized regions that have not benefited from the increase in arms and ammunition orders. These areas, where tens of millions of Russians live, are increasingly suffering from the militarization of the country's economy. In response to oil and gas sanctions, Moscow has relied on clandestine networks to maintain its exports. A notable example is Name Obscured, described as the king of the Russian oil market, who leads a complex network of companies and vessels to bypass the sanctions, allowing Russian oil to continue flowing to foreign markets. Global market reactions were immediate following the announcement of the new sanctions. Oil prices rose by more than 4%, with analysts noting that refineries in India and China are seeking alternative suppliers to meet their demands. This change in suppliers is related to the fear among Indians and Chinese of also being affected by these new sanctions. This new wave of sanctions also reveals a strategic shift by the United States. With domestic inflation falling and a much more stable global oil supply, Washington now has more freedom to act against Russia without fearing severe repercussions on American and European economies. This new approach also aims to strengthen Ukraine's position by weakening Moscow's economic capabilities, hoping that Kyiv will have more leverage in future peace negotiations. On the other hand, the timing of these sanctions is also political. With the transition to the Trump administration approaching, Biden sought to consolidate a policy of pressure against Moscow, leaving a legacy that would be difficult to reverse. Militarily, Russia continues to bet on a strategy of heavy attrition. Despite slow and costly advances, Moscow hopes that the combination of attacks on infrastructure and constant pressure on the front lines will eventually force Ukraine to yield. However, economic sanctions might make sustaining this attrition strategy in the long term more challenging without adequate financial resources. With the sanctions affecting the main funding avenue for its invasion, Putin's ability to equip his armed forces could be compromised. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any updates.